to watch, but you know they're there, and you clearly see them in the lake. And so for me, the prosperity is like overflowing now. So maybe that will be good and it'll rub off. But so when you get into these ideas of carp, Li, pronounced the same as both the character Li for profit and the character for strength and power, and the fact that obviously carp lay a lot of eggs. The pair of carp means a harmonious marriage and things like that. So same thing, you get into bamboo. The word for bamboo also means to wish and to congratulate. And obviously we talk about it in scholar study about the Confucian value of bamboo as strong, upright. The Taoists talk about it bending to the weather. And we also talk about its, again, a hollow modesty from the scholar study. And so here's the bamboo from the scholar study, and we talk about that quite often. And then you get into bats, and bats are just absolutely loaded with all kinds of homonyms, rebuses. We talk about the homonym fu, which is bat and happiness. But then you get into all kinds of things like fu jiai, which is an eye on a coin, creates a visual pun. So saying that is a bat on the coin, it sounds exactly like saying happiness is before your eyes. So you know, there's all kinds of wonderful poetic ways of seeing things when you start talking about the ornament and the way that the garden is used based on these desires. The gourd is a very popular symbol. That's, again, our shelf in the scholar study. And the gourd's used by the eight immortals. You see them carrying all kinds of potions and protection. And you talk about hud, which is also the word for blessings. So there's all kinds of ways of thinking about that. And there, if you don't know about it, there's the gourd on the trip title as well. So, you know, there's the five bats, the five happiness, but there's the gourd. And then you get into lotuses. And for those of you who remember, we've had this quilt. I brought it in a few times. That's Amy's quilt. My wife Amy's right here. Which she made for me, and she doesn't, you know, probably didn't even realize how appropriate the lotus is. I'm going to embarrass her here for a second. The lotus stem and lotus pod shown together symbolize marital harmony and sexual union. But it talks about all kinds of obviously different things. This is one that I didn't know about, and we all value the osmanthus. You know, obviously our 100-year-old osmanthus, we all talk about it as you come into the garden. But the osmanthus blossom guidi can mean honor or precious. And obviously our 100-year-old tree is very precious to us, so that's sort of an interesting one there. The persimmon, that's what it is right now. I just took that a couple days ago, and then this is obviously from a couple years ago, and it went in its golden state. The round aspect, you know, talks about protection and beginnings coming out of the womb and so forth. But one of the interesting things about the persimmon is that it's, again, a pun. She talks about pronunciation is the word for matters, affairs, or events. It's also the word for official. And so it's very much a symbol for the master of the official. And when it was probably designed in this hook to have a persimmon right here off of this porch. This is the porch off the Hall of Brocaded Clouds. When you greet the mayor of Suzhou, you greet them in that hall, and you bring them out onto that porch. And right there on that official porch would be the persimmon, which is the fruit of this official matters of your affairs and government. So it's a perfect location for that symbol, in other words. But then you get into clouds. And obviously clouds are just a huge topic in itself, and this painting is just obviously, one of the great techniques of this painting, and painting on silk is the idea as you dry the brush out and you paint this painting, this gold of the fog just sort of mists around it. It's one of the real masterpieces of this painting. And clouds symbolize good fortune, happiness, and reflection of nature. Clouds are often found scattered or merged around the mountain. And one of the really interesting things about this painting is the title. It's not Solitary Temple amid foggy peaks, it's amid clearing peaks. And that clearing starts talking about all kinds of interesting things in terms of what this painting talks about in terms of Buddhism, and we'll get into that. But when you talk about clouds and man's desire to build with the clouds, clouds. And again, the hall of brocaded clouds, our main hall, is the epitome of our hierarchy. It's a universal thing. Clouds throughout man's history represent a desire to build and to reach to the gods. And so, here's Greek Zeus up there, and here they're trying to build, temples to reach into the clouds. But, when man built, we had to build out of stone for up until the last 100 years. So this heavy material trying to build into the clouds is a conflict. But what's interesting is this idea of clouds and thunderbolts. Even in the Chinese gods here, there's a god of thunder, and he has, because of these inscriptions, people frequently requested the god of thunder, the Yong, to use thunderbolts to kill the boogies or evil spirits. So there's some universal gods and the gods living in the clouds throughout cultures. Obviously, the Tower of Babel is a classic thing where when people were getting into all kinds of trouble trying to build to the clouds or to reach heaven. And obviously, people try to reach upward to heaven to assume moral legitimacy. So this is a 1960s, I think it's like late 1960s version of trying to reach the clouds. Again, when you talk about the whole idea of trying to reach and build toward the clouds, build to your God, and hold it up with stones, it's difficult because it all is built out of impressions. So, I talk about the Gothic cathedral. You have lots of columns reaching to a singular God, and you have to do it out of architecture of compression. All this load has to come down to lots of little legs.
Is this Notre Dame?
Yeah, it's a model that we built for our lecture last 3 years ago. So here you have all this load holding up this roof, coming down to all these legs to hold that roof up. It's based on the flying buttress, which is carrying the loads down like that, and then you combine the flying buttresses, and that's what gives you those names that give you the idea of the Gothic cathedral. But you take one of those buttresses like that, and you turn it around, and that then becomes like the corner of one of our pavilions. And it's the same concept, but turned over. For our pavilions, in today's world, you would have to have steel and big shear walls. But look at this huge, heavy roof that wants to fall down that way with glue. But yet, with all this load on these eaves out here, that load balances that load, which means that all of that load can be carried on a single column holding straight up. And that's the big idea that gets missed on, everybody asks, why are the eaves upturned? And structurally, that is, if I was going to do a doctoral thesis, that would be, because even the guys from Suzhou, when they were here, the guys from the Suzhou Design Institute, when I talked to them about the eaves, they were like, oh, we just always done it that way. But when you look at the loads, and I've talked to structural engineers, other ways of doing it are parabolic arches, and that's described from Gaudi in Barcelona. But then, again, all of this is talking about building into the clouds. A place that is not that well known is this Bagan in Burma, Myanmar. There's 13,000 pagodas that were built over time. And we're talking about building into the clouds. Imagine 13,000 of these things out there on that river plain in a foggy day would be absolutely amazing. So there's a few, obviously, in today's world still left, but out of 13,000. But that idea of reaching multiple times into the sky and reaching for the clouds, there's Angkor Wat in Cambodia, which turns out is the largest. It's the what we were talking about. It's the largest. The largest religious building in the world, essentially. Yeah, there it is, right down there. And so the plan of this building is actually huge, but there's continuous verticality reaching for the sky. And so this whole idea of universal energy reaching for the sky, coming down to individual responsibility. Our garden can be seen through this upliftedness coming down to singular columns. And you start going around the garden and you start looking at that movement. And you think about the 13,000 pagodas in Burma, and this in our little 1 acre space, it creates that ideal. And it's reaching for the clouds. This whole idea of the gray roof with very little contrast between gray roof and gray sky, etc., reaching for the clouds. The Taoists. So the Taoists start overlapping with Chinese mythology, and there's a term called the tripod of culture, of Chinese culture. The tripod of Chinese culture is Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. But like all good things, like on our roof of the whole rotated clouds, there's the three plenties, but it's a square building, so there's +1, right? So the three plenties, pomegranate, peach, and Buddha's hand, but there's 4 corners, so they threw in +1, the plum of the 5 happinesses. We have the tripod of Chinese culture, but then there's a +1, which is the basis, which is Chinese mythology, and you can't really separate them, which is interesting. You get into this idea of the magic writing of the Taoists, and it talks about that writing itself and the history of writing. Not only does water come from the moon, but writing itself is a condensation from the clouds in the sky. So when you talk about clouds and you talk about rain, it's essentially the magic, and you think about, we're the only animal that writes. The magic of writing is this condensation of the clouds in the sky. It's a very powerful aspect. Confucius, I didn't find a direct Confucian tie to clouds, and if you have one, let me know. It'd be worthy to try to get in here. But one of the things I thought was interesting is that Confucius talk about this 4 different classes: the scholar, the landowner, the farmer, and the merchant. And what's really sort of interesting is you talk about how the scholar is directing the moral and education of the culture and so forth, but the merchants who sold for profit add nothing of value to the society and are ranked low on the social scale. And that sort of talks about why we're in so much trouble in our world. That all we're doing is selling to each other. And the whole thing about Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged is all we're doing is just selling services to each other. We're not really producing anything. That was known, by the Confucius, talking, back then. But the whole idea of Buddhism in this painting is just loaded. And one of the things that was always very confusing for me was the idea of heaven and clouds and Buddhism. And what I got to finding out was that there's a whole lot of heavens in Buddhism. The realm of the Asura is a later refinement of the heavenly realm and was inserted between human and heavens. Okay, so when we're reading this painting, let's start talking about reading this painting. Here's the humans down here on your journey, and then you're starting to wind your way up. And this is as high as the human actually gets in this painting. And then you can continue up higher, okay? But there's this Azure right here. One important aspect of Buddhist heaven, there's also Buddhist heaven which resembles Olympus of Greek mythology, and that's what I'm talking again about Zeus and the clouds and lightning and so forth. That comes into play. But one of the things that helped clear things up about Buddhism and heaven was that there is also a thing called pure land, which is separate from Buddhist heavens. And the pure land you only reach that when you get true nirvana, which frees yourself from the reincarnation of the Buddhist life. So in Buddhism's life, you study, you do good work, you be reincarnated as a better being the next time. And it's always a cycle. But very, very infrequently would you ever achieve a life that's well enough to achieve nirvana, which would then get you into this pure lands. And so this painting may be up there, pure land, but so then you get into again the Chinese mythology, and so many times when we talk about the garden and symbolism and the Taoists and so forth, it gets back to the old Chinese mythologies. The whole idea of mooncakes and pomegranates, the Kite Festival in April, the Eight Immortals, all of these symbols date back to the pre-Christian religions, and it starts tying all of these different combined things that we all talk about in the garden. So you start getting into rocks and mountains again. The art of building rock mountains in a classical Chinese garden must have a unity of parts, and sometimes there's a lone mountain peak that provides inspiration to the visitor who gaze upon it and lets them think about the ancient Chinese immortals who lived on the mountaintops. So again, it's this Chinese mythology that provides the idea of mortals and gods living in the clouds and the mountaintops. And so, whether it's the painting or these lone mountain peaks, as you experience the garden. But then, as I said, you have clouds that lead to rain, and it's so constant in our garden. We have our pavilion here with flowers washed in spring rain, right there. We have the barge which is painted boat in misty rain. We have 1,000 ravines shrouded in thick clouds. And obviously the hall of brocaded clouds, which all, again, so more than half of our lake in poetic names tied to clouds, water, and this idea of literature, painting, and prosperity. And then again, when you get to the mountains themselves, the Chinese phrase for pilgrimage, and again, Shao Shang Jin Jing, means paying one's respect to a mountain. Seeing rocks in the garden is an invitation to make a mental journey to these sacred mountains. And so when you're reading the painting or when you're visiting the garden, it starts talking about that. This is a really sort of a fun thing when you find this. This is the oracle script. Obviously, we all know about the different calligraphy styles when you're writing throughout Chinese history. In a very simplified script style, this is the character for heaven or sky. And for those of you who know the logo rock of Suzhou, which is Cloud Cap Peak, which is in the Lingering Garden, here's the most famous rock of Suzhou, Taiyu Rock, and there it is, heaven and sky. Right? So, very much a visual pun in terms of the Chinese script of that. So, let's talk about actually reading the painting and journeying into our painting. So, the Chinese name for that painting, Jing Wan. Somebody do that for me? Okay, thanks. So that is the Chinese name for the solitary temple in Green Peaks. And how it relates to our garden itself. So here you have the mortals, and, starting in the painting down there in the lower left, and the beginning of their journey coming over the bridge. And